The great chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from across the known universe. Some floated in anti-gravity fields. Others stood on multiple legs or rested in pools of liquid that matched their home worlds. The chamber had been built to hold representatives from 47 different species. And today every seat was occupied. Ambassador Vexthal of the Corvani Collective moved to the central platform. His skin, which could change color based on his emotions, shifted to a deep purple that showed confidence and authority. Behind him, holographic displays flickered to life, showing images of a small blue planet orbiting an average yellow star. Fellow members of the council, Vexthal began. His voice translated instantly into hundreds of languages. We have completed our 3-cycle observation of the species known as humans. I am here to present our findings and recommend their provisional membership in our Great Alliance. The chamber hummed with quiet conversation. A new species joining the council was always significant news. The Corvani had been watching Earth for years, studying human behavior through their broadcasts, their internet, and careful observation from hidden stations near their moon, High Arbiter Zinkel. The ancient crystalline being who led the council chimed softly to restore order. Please continue, Ambassador. What have you learned about these humans? Vexthal gestured, and the holographic display changed to show scenes from human films. Soldiers running through explosions, hospitals filled with wounded warriors, graveyards stretching across green hills, protesters marching with signs demanding peace. The humans are a fearful species, Vexthal announced. Our behavioral analysts have studied their culture extensively, and the evidence is clear. They are deeply afraid of warfare. He pointed to the images as he spoke. They create countless stories about the horrors of combat. Their entertainment is filled with depictions of war as traumatic and devastating. Their soldiers return from conflicts with severe psychological damage, something they call post-traumatic stress disorder. They build monuments to their dead and hold elaborate ceremonies of mourning that last for generations. The Thessari delegate, a being made of living flame contained within a magnetic field, flickered with interest. They memorialize their fallen warriors. This suggests deep emotional attachment to loss. Exactly, Vexthal agreed. And there is more. Humans actively protest against military actions. They march in their streets demanding peace. They create organizations dedicated entirely to preventing warfare. They give their warriors extensive therapy and treat the lasting effects of combat as a medical condition, requiring treatment. He paused, letting his words sink in. In short, humans fear war more than any species we have observed. They understand its costs, and they recoil from them. High Arbiter Zinkel's crystalline form hummed thoughtfully. This aligns with our classification protocols. Species that demonstrate high fear responses to warfare rarely pose expansion threats to their neighbors. They tend toward isolation and defense rather than conquest. The Vorten delegate, a massive creature with thick armor plating and 4 powerful arms, rumbled skeptically. Fear can make a species unpredictable. A cornered prey animal often fights hardest. True, Vexthal acknowledged, but humans have shown consistent patterns of conflict avoidance when possible. They prefer negotiation and trade to warfare. Their fear makes them seek peaceful solutions. The council chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. This assessment made sense to most of the delegates. In their experience, species either embraced warfare or feared it. Those who feared it were manageable, useful even. They could serve as administrators, traders, or technical specialists. They posed no threat to the established order. I recommend provisional membership, Vexthal concluded. Humans have achieved faster-than-light travel and are ready to join the galactic community. Their fear of warfare makes them ideal candidates for peaceful integration. The vote was quick and unanimous. Humanity would be invited to join the Galactic Council. None of the delegates questioned the assessment. The evidence seemed clear and overwhelming. Humans made movies about the horrors of war. They wrote poetry about its tragedies. They established entire organizations dedicated to preventing conflict. They treated their warriors' psychological wounds as serious medical conditions. What the Council completely failed to understand was the difference between fearing something and being. Unable to face it, 3 months later, Earth received the invitation. The United Nations assembled a delegation of diplomats, scientists, and cultural experts. They would travel to Station Nexus, the Council's central hub. To formally accept humanity's new membership, the military insisted on sending a security detachment. Some Council observers thought this was unnecessary, even paranoid, but the humans would not budge on this point. 12 soldiers from the United States Army would accompany the delegation. Sergeant First Class Danny Martinez read the Council's cultural brief on humans during the long transport flight to Station Nexus. He was a veteran of 3 combat deployments, a man who had seen the worst that war could offer. He had lost his left eye to shrapnel in Afghanistan and still had fragments of metal embedded in his skull. The military had offered him a medical discharge, but he had refused. "So let me get this straight," Danny said, looking up from his reading. "These aliens think we're scared of fighting?" Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Holloway, the detachment commander, sat across from him reviewing her own materials. She was a tall woman with gray streaking her dark hair, earned through 20 years of service. "That's their assessment, Sergeant. Apparently, our war movies gave them the wrong impression." Corporal Keisha Brown laughed from her seat nearby. She was the youngest member of the detachment, but she had already served 2 combat tours. "Wait until they see what we do when we're scared, ma'am." The transport carried them through the void between stars, a journey that would have seemed like magic to their grandparents. Danny spent the time studying the other species they would encounter, memorizing their appearances and cultural protocols. He also studied the station's layout, noting defensive positions and potential choke points out of pure habit. Specialist Carlos Reyes, the team's communications expert, noticed what Danny was doing. "You expecting trouble, Sergeant?" "Always," Danny replied. "That's how you stay alive long enough to be surprised when there isn't any." Station Nexus was massive, a structure larger than most cities floating in the darkness between star systems. It housed millions of beings from dozens of species, all working together in what the Council called the greatest achievement of galactic civilization. The human delegation was greeted by Ambassador Vexthal himself. His skin shifted through colors as he welcomed them, settling on a warm orange that indicated friendliness. Behind him stood a squad of Corvani guards, tall beings with elaborate ceremonial armor and weapons that looked more decorative than functional. Danny assessed them automatically. Their stance was wrong. Their weapons were held for display rather than use. They had never seen real combat. He exchanged a quick glance with Patricia and saw she had noticed the same things. "Welcome to Station Nexus," Vexthal said warmly. "We are honored to receive humanity into our great alliance. Please, there is no need for your soldiers to be tense. This station has not seen violence in over 200 cycles. Your warriors may rest and relax." Patricia smiled politely. "They're not here because we expect violence, Ambassador. They're here because we prepare for it." Vexthal's skin shifted to confused orange. How exhausting that must be, to always anticipate danger. "You get used to it," Patricia replied, and her smile didn't waver. The Corvani ambassador made a sound that the translator rendered as a sympathetic sigh. "Such is the burden of a fearful species, I suppose. But you need not worry here. You are safe among friends." Danny said nothing, but his eye swept the corridor ahead, automatically cataloging cover positions and sight lines. Keisha checked her weapon, subtle movement that the Corvani guards didn't even notice. Safe was a word soldiers learned never to trust. Safe was what you called a place right before everything went wrong, and Danny Martinez had survived 3 wars by never ever assuming he was safe. 3 weeks passed on Station Nexus. The human delegation attended meetings, signed treaties, and participated in cultural exchanges. The soldiers of the security detachment stood guard at doorways, walked patrol routes, tried to stay alert despite the endless boredom of peaceful duty. Danny Martinez used the time to learn. He studied the station's layout until he could navigate it blindfolded. He watched the Corvani guards and noted their routines, their weaknesses, their complete lack of actual combat readiness. He made friends with some of the maintenance workers and learned which corridors were rarely used, which doors could be forced open, which systems could be overridden in an emergency. The other species on the station found the human soldiers fascinating in a pitying sort of way. They would stop and watch them patrol, whispering to each other about the poor, fearful creatures who could not relax even in perfect safety. Some offered advice on meditation, techniques or chemical relaxants that might help them overcome their anxiety. Patricia. Holloway accepted all suggestions with polite thanks and quiet amusement. On the morning of the 23rd day, everything changed. Ed. The Vorath had been considered a minor threat for centuries. They were a hive species from the outer spiral, insectoid creatures with chitinous armor and razor-sharp limbs. Their entire existence revolved around expansion and consumption. They devoured resources, bred rapidly, and moved on to new territories when they had exhausted the old ones. The Galactic Council had contained them for generations using buffer zones and automated defense networks. The Vorath were dangerous but primitive, capable of faster-than-light travel and therefore limited to slow expansion through normal space. But the Vorath had been learning. They had captured ships, studied technology, and adapted. After decades of secret development, they had finally built vessels capable of crossing the vast distances between stars in moments rather than years. Their first target was Station Nexus itself. Danny was eating breakfast. In the human quarters, when the station shuddered, the lights flickered. Alarms began screaming in a dozen different languages. He was on his feet and moving before his coffee cup hit the floor. Around him, the other soldiers reacted with the same instant readiness. Weapons appeared in hands. Equipment was grabbed. They were ready for combat within seconds. Patricia's voice came over their communication channel. All personnel, Rally Point Alpha. We have a situation. They moved through corridors filled with panic. Other species ran in all directions, screaming in languages the translators struggled to process. The Corvani guards were nowhere to be seen. Their posts abandoned. Danny grabbed a fleeing Desiree. The flame being's magnetic containment field warm against his hands. What's happening? The Vorath, the Visari, flickered in terror. They're here. Hundreds of ships. They're boarding the station. Danny released the alien and kept moving. His mind was already calculating. Boarding action meant close combat. The Vorath were dangerous up close, fast and strong, with natural weapons. But they were also predictable, driven by instinct rather than tactics. He had fought enemies like that before. The human soldiers gathered at Rally Point Alpha, defensible position near the diplomatic quarters. Patricia was already there, speaking rapidly into her communication device, trying to reach the station's security command. They're not responding, she reported. Either their command structure has collapsed, or they've been overrun. What about our transport? Carlos asked. Still intact as far as I know. Docking Bay 7. Donnie pulled up the station schematic on his tactical display. That's half the station away, ma'am. Through some of the most populated sections? I know. Patricia's face was grim, but calm. But it's our only way out. And we're not leaving without the diplomatic delegation.
Ow.
The delegation. Danny had almost forgotten about them in the chaos. Ambassador Williams and his team were supposed to be attending a council session in the main chamber. I'll take a team to get them, Danny said. You secure the route to the docking bay. Patricia nodded. Take Brown, Reyes, and Nguyen. The rest stay with me. We'll work our way to Ward Bay 7 and clear a path. Meet us there. Danny gathered his team and moved out. The corridors were still filled with fleeing aliens, but now there was something else mixed in with the crowd. Screams of a different kind. The wet sounds of violence. They found the first Vorath bodies at a junction 3 levels down. The creatures had been killed by some kind of energy weapon, probably station security making a last stand. There were also Corvani bodies, their ceremonial armor slashed open by chitinous claws. Contact ahead, Keisha reported, her voice steady despite what she was seeing. Looks like a Vorath hunting pack. Maybe 6 or 7. Danny assessed the situation. The Vorath were moving away from them, chasing a group of fleeing civilians. They hadn't noticed the humans yet. He made a decision. We take them. Fast and quiet, they moved like shadows, using the chaos as cover. The Vorath were focused on their prey, their insect minds locked onto the fleeing aliens. They never saw the humans coming. Danny hit the first Vorath from behind, his knife finding the gap between armored plates. The creature shrieked and died. Around him, his team engaged with brutal efficiency. Rifles barked in short, controlled bursts. Blades flashed in the emergency lighting. In 12 seconds, it was over. 7 Vorath lay dead on the deck. Tommy Nugent had taken a slash across his forearm. He wrapped it with a field bandage without breaking stride. You good? Danny asked. Fine, Sergeant. Let's keep moving. They pushed deeper into the station. The sounds of battle grew louder. They passed more bodies, mostly aliens, but some Vorath as well. The station's defenders were fighting back, but they were losing. The Vorath were everywhere, swarming through corridors and chambers like the insects they resembled. The council chamber was sealed when they reached it. Massive doors designed to withstand any threat blocked their path. Danny could hear sounds from the other side, the clicks and hisses of Vorath trying to break through. He activated his communication device. Ambassador Williams, this is Sergeant Martinez. We're outside the chamber. What's your status? A relieved voice answered. Sergeant, thank God. We're trapped in here with about 20 council delegates. The Vorath are trying to cut through the doors. How much time do we have? The security system estimates 12 minutes before they break through. Danny looked at his team. 12 minutes to figure out how to get into a sealed chamber, rescue 24 civilians, and fight their way across half a station filled with hostile aliens to reach a docking bay that might already be overrun. He had faced worse odds. Not often, but he had faced them. Sir, we're going to get you out of there. When those doors open, be ready to move. He turned to his team. Reyes, find me another way into that chamber. Nguyen, see if you can access the station's systems. Get us some intel on what's between us and Bay 7. Brown, you're with me? We need to buy some time. The Vorath cutting through the chamber doors never saw the attack coming. Danny and Keisha hit them from behind, moving fast and hitting hard. They killed 9 of the creatures in the first 30 seconds of combat. The Vorath turned to face this new threat. Their attention pulled away from the chamber. That was all Danny needed. Reyes, tell me you found something. Maintenance shaft, 30 meters down. It connects to the chamber's environmental systems. Tight squeeze, but passable. Good enough. Nguyen, bad news, Sergeant? There's a Vorath assault team holding the approaches to Bay 7. Maybe 40 or 50 of them. Danny grinned, though there was no humor in it. Then we'll have to go through them. He had been afraid before. He was afraid now, but fear had never stopped him. It wasn't going to start today. The maintenance shaft was exactly as Carlos had described it. Tight, dark, and barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. Danny went first, pulling himself along with his arms while his rifle scraped against the metal walls. Behind him came his team, then the diplomats, then the council delegates. Ambassador Vextel had to fold his long limbs in ways that clearly caused him pain, but he did not complain. The Thessari delegate dimmed their flame to near darkness to avoid detection. High Arbiter Zinkel, the crystalline being, moved with surprising grace despite their rigid form. They emerged into a storage chamber filled with emergency supplies. Danny cleared the room quickly, then helped the others out of the shaft, one by one. We need to reach Bay 7, he told the group. That's our way off this station. The route is going to be dangerous. Stay behind us. Move when we move, stop when we stop. If one of us goes down, step over them and keep moving. Ambassador Williams nodded. He was scared. Danny could see it in his face, but he was holding together. That was good enough. What if you all go down? Vextel asked. His skin was pale gray, the Corvini color of fear. Then you run, Danny said simply. Run, and don't look back. They moved out into the corridor. The station was a nightmare now. Emergency lighting casting red shadows everywhere. Smoke drifting through the air from fires that no one was fighting. Bodies lay scattered on the deck plates, Corvani and Vorath alike. Danny led them through the chaos with careful precision. He had memorized the station's layout, and now that knowledge paid off. He avoided the main corridors where Vorith hunting packs roamed freely. He used maintenance passages and service tunnels, paths that the aliens had not yet discovered. They encountered their first obstacle at a junction near the commercial district. A Voroth scouting party, 12 of the creatures moving in a loose formation, blocked the only route forward. Danny held up his fist, signaling a stop. The group froze instantly.
Ow.
Too many to go around, Keisha whispered. We'll have to go through. Danny nodded. He looked at his team, these men and women who had trained and fought and bled together. They looked back at him with steady eyes. Standard assault pattern. I take point. Brown, you're on my left. Nguyen, right? Reyes, cover the rear and protect the civilians. Understood, Sergeant, they responded in unison. Danny took a breath. His heart was pounding. His mouth was dry. Fear coiled in his stomach like a living thing. He channeled it, let it sharpen his senses and quicken his reflexes. Fear was a tool, nothing more. You learned to use it, or it used you. Move, they hit the Vorath like a thunderbolt. Danny fired twice, 2 precise shots that dropped 2 creatures before they even knew they were under attack. He kept moving, closing the distance, his knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. The Vorath were fast. But humans had been fighting faster enemies for thousands of years. Danny ducked under a slashing claw, drove his blade into a joint, twisted and pulled. The creature screamed and fell. Beside him, Keisha fought with controlled fury. She had grown up in Detroit, learned to fight in streets that showed no mercy. The Vorath were strong, but she had faced worse. Her rifle barked again and again, each shot finding its mark. Tommy took a hit. A Vorath claw caught him across the chest, slicing through his body armor, but not deep enough to kill. He grunted in pain, pivoted, and shot his attacker in what passed for its face. Then he kept fighting. In less than a minute, it was over. 12 Vorath lay dead on the deck. Danny checked his team. Tommy was hurt, but mobile. Everyone else was uninjured. They had burned through a lot of ammunition, but they had enough for what lay ahead. The council delegates stared at the carnage with something like disbelief. They had watched the human soldiers attack a numerically superior force without hesitation, had seen them take wounds and keep fighting, had witnessed violence more intense than anything in their experience. How... Vextel's translator struggled with his emotions. How do you do this? You were afraid. I could smell your fear hormones. Yet you attacked anyway. Danny wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. Ambassador, everyone in my team has been scared plenty of times. We don't fight because we're not afraid. We fight because there are things more important than being afraid. What things? Danny looked at the civilians they were protecting. At Ambassador Williams and his diplomats, at the council delegates who had dismissed humanity as a fearful species. You, he said simply. Each other. Doing the job. That's what matters. They kept moving. The station's power systems were failing now, sections going dark as damage accumulated. Danny navigated by memory and emergency markers, leading the group through the maze of corridors toward Bay 7. Patricia's voice crackled over the communication channel. Martinez, what's your status? We have the package. Approximately 2 kilometers from Bay 7. What's it look like ahead? Not good. There's a Vorath assault force blocking the main approach. Maybe 50 or 60 of them. They've set up a defensive position. Danny felt his stomach tighten. 50 Vorath was a lot. His team was down to 4 soldiers with limited ammunition, and they had 24 civilians to protect. Options. Working on it. We're trying to find another route, but everything else is either collapsed or overrun. The main approach might be our only choice. Danny looked at his team. They looked back at him with steady eyes. None of them flinched. Then we go through them, he said. Danny, that's a hard ask. 4 soldiers against 50. I know, but we don't leave people behind. We never have. There was a pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was firm. Understood. We'll hit them from 2 sides. My team from the north, yours from the south. Coordinate timing on my mark. They approached the final obstacle with careful precision. Through the smoke and flickering lights, Danny could see the Vorith position. They'd overturned furniture and cargo containers to create barriers. Their weapons were ready, pointed at the main corridor. They're expecting an attack, Carlos observed. But they're facing the wrong way. Not for long. Danny checked his ammunition count. 3 magazines. It would have to be enough. On Lieutenant Colonel's mark, we go fast and we don't stop. Get the civilians through the line. Then we hold until the transport is ready. Tommy adjusted his bandages. Blood was seeping through. He ignored it. What if we can't hold? Then we buy enough time for them to escape. Danny met the young soldier's eyes. That's the job. Always has been. High Arbiter Zinkel moved closer, their crystalline form chiming softly. You would sacrifice yourselves for us? After we dismissed your species as cowards? Danny smiled, though there was no happiness in it. Ma'am, with respect, we don't do this for thanks or recognition. We do it because it's right. Now please stay behind me, and when I say run, you run. Patricia's voice came over the channel. All teams, prepare to engage. On my mark, 3, ... 2, ... mark. Danny rose from cover and began to fire. Beside him, his team moved forward, weapons blazing. From across the junction, he could see Patricia's team doing the same. The Vorath position dissolved into chaos. The creatures scrambled to respond to attacks from 2 directions, their defensive formation breaking apart. Humans poured through the gaps, moving fast and shooting accurately. Danny pushed into the heart of the enemy position. His rifle clicked empty. He dropped it and drew his pistol, kept firing. A Vorath lunged at him. He sidestepped, drove his knife into its throat, kept moving. Around him, the battle raged. Human soldiers fighting with everything they had against overwhelming odds. Some fell. Others stepped over them and kept fighting. The civilians ran through the chaos, protected by a corridor of fire. Ambassador Williams grabbed a fallen weapon and covered an elderly Corvani delegate who had stumbled. Even the diplomats were fighting now. Fear transformed into desperate action. The transport was there, its boarding ramp down, engines already warming up. Safety was meters away. Danny felt a claw rake across his back. Pain exploded through his body. He turned, emptied his pistol into the Voroth that had wounded him, then picked up the nearest weapon he could find and kept fighting, everyone on board. Patricia shouted, "Move, move, move." The survivors piled into the transport. Danny was the last one, backing up the ramp while still firing. A Vorath reached for him. Keisha shot it in the head. The ramp closed. The transport lurched into motion. They had made it. Danny collapsed against the bulkhead, blood pooling beneath him. Maria Santos, the team medic, was there immediately, cutting away his armor to get at the wound. You're going to be okay, Sergeant. It's bad, but not fatal. Danny nodded weakly. Around him, he could see the cost of their escape. 3 soldiers lay covered with emergency blankets, their faces hidden. More were wounded, some seriously. The deck was slick with blood, but the civilians were safe. The mission was complete. He closed his eyes and let the medic work. The transport flew through the darkness between stars, carrying its cargo of survivors towards safety. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Holloway sat in the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls despite the wound in her shoulder. Blood had soaked through her bandages hours ago, but she refused to leave the pilot's seat until they reached the human diplomatic vessel. Behind her, in the passenger compartment, the cost of survival lay visible for all to see. 3 human soldiers were dead. Private First Class Amy Chen had died holding the line at Base 7. Shot through the chest while covering the civilians' retreat. Corporal Marcus Webb had been killed in the maintenance tunnels, ambushed by a Vorath patrol. Specialist Jerome Palmer had taken a wound in the first engagement and died on the transport despite everything Maria could do to save him. The rest of the soldiers bore wounds of varying severity. Danny Martinez lay on a stretcher, his back wrapped in bandages, drifting in and out of consciousness from pain medication. Tommy Nguyen sat with his arm in a sling and his chest wrapped tight. Keisha Brown had burns across her left side from a Vorath incendiary weapon. Carlos Reyes had lost 2 fingers to a Lucky/Dot. Maria Santos moved between them, checking bandages and administering medication. She had a deep gash across her shoulder from the final fight at Bay 7. But she ignored her own wound while treating the others. The council delegates watched all of this in stunned silence. Ambassador Vextel's skin had settled into a color his species had no name for. It was somewhere between the gray of fear and the blue of sorrow, mixed with something else entirely. His translator struggled to convey his thoughts when he finally spoke. "I do not understand," he said softly. "You were afraid. I could see it in your faces. I could smell the chemicals your bodies produce when experiencing terror. Your hearts were racing, your muscles trembling. You knew you might die." Danny opened his eyes, his voice rough from medication. "Yeah, we knew. Yet you attacked anyway. You ran toward the danger instead of away from it. You took wounds that should have incapacitated you and kept fighting. You died protecting us." Vextel's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Why?" Danny was quiet for a moment. The question deserved a real answer, not a quick dismissal. "Back on Earth," he said slowly, "my grandfather fought in a war. Vietnam, they called it. He was 18 years old, scared out of his mind, thousands of miles from home in a jungle that wanted to kill him." Danny paused, remembering stories told in a quiet living room. He came back with nightmares that never went away. He woke up screaming until the day he died. "This only proves our assessment was correct," Vextel said. "Your species fears war deeply." "Yeah, we do." Danny met the ambassador's eyes. "When I told my grandfather I was enlisting, you know what he said? He said, 'Some things are worth the nightmares.' He said, being effer. Aid isn't the same as being a coward. He said real courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling the fear and doing what needs to be done anyway." High Arbiter Zinkel, the ancient crystalline being, chimed softly. "You are saying that your fear makes your courage more meaningful, not less. I'm saying that we feel everything." Danny looked around at his wounded comrades, at the covered bodies of his fallen friends. Every loss hurts. Every death leaves a scar. We don't become machines that feel nothing. We stay human, we feel the pain, and we keep fighting, because some things matter more than our own comfort or safety. The Thessary delegate, their flame flickering weakly after hours without proper fuel, spoke up. "This explains much. Your war memorials, your ceremonies of mourning, your treatment of wounded warriors, these are not signs of weakness. They're signs that we honor what warfare costs," Maria said, looking up from her work. "We remember our dead because they matter. We treat our wounded because we refuse to abandon the people who fought for us. We build memorials because we never want to forget the price of what we do." "But why do you create so much art about war's horrors?" Vextel asked. "Your films, your books, your poetry, they all depict warfare as terrible and traumatic." Keisha laughed, though it turned into a wince from her burns. "Because it is terrible and traumatic. We're not lying about that. War is hell. Anyone who tells you different is trying to sell you something. But sometimes hell is where you need to go. Sometimes the alternative is worse." The transport shuddered slightly as it docked with the USS Grant, the human diplomatic vessel. Medical teams were waiting, rushing aboard to help the wounded. The dead were carried off with careful reverence, their bodies treated with dignity even in death. As Danny was lifted onto a proper medical gurney, Ambassador Vextel followed him. The Corvaini's skin had finally settled into a single color, one that their species traditionally reserved for the deepest respect. "Sergeant Martinez," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. My people studied your species for cycles. We analyzed your behavior, your culture, your history, and we fundamentally misunderstood everything we saw." Danny managed a weak smile. "Easy mistake to make, Ambassador. We confuse ourselves sometimes. No, you do not understand." Vexel's voice carried an intensity that the translator barely captured. "We saw your fear and assumed it meant you could not fight. We saw your grief and assumed it meant you were weak. We saw your art about wars, horrors, and assumed it meant you would avoid conflict at all costs." He paused. "We were completely wrong. About what? About what your fear meant." Vextal leaned closer. "You do not fear war less than other species. You fear it more. You understand its true cost better than any civilization we've encountered. And yet, when war came to us, you were the ones who fought." His mandibles clicked with something that might have been shame. "Our guards fled. Our security forces collapsed. The Corvani Collective, which has prided itself on warrior traditions for 1,000 years, abandoned their posts and ran. But the humans, the fearful species that we pitied, stood their ground and died protecting beings they had never met." The medical team began moving Danny toward the treatment bay. Vextal walked alongside. "Your species has a quality we have never encountered," the ambassador continued. "You feel the fear, you understand the cost, you know you might die, and you fight anyway. Not because you don't care about your lives, but because you care about something else more." He stopped as they reached the treatment bay doors. "We have no word for this in our language. The closest translation would be something like chosen courage or willful sacrifice, but even that does not capture it fully." Danny looked up at the alien ambassador. This being from a civilization that had traveled between stars when humans were still learning to farm. "We have a word for it," Danny said. "We call it duty." The medical team took him into surgery. He would survive. Most of them would survive. The dead would be mourned, the wounded would heal, and the survivors would carry new scars alongside their old ones. But something had changed. The council delegates had witnessed something that no amount of observation could have revealed. They had seen humans at their worst and their best, terrified and fighting, dying and still refusing to give up. They had seen what fear looked like. It was transformed into something else entirely. Over the next 6 hours, human Marines from the Grant coordinated with surviving Council forces to repel the Vorath assault on Station Nexus. The battle was costly. More humans died. More were wounded. But the station held, and the Vorath were driven back. When it was over, the Council delegates gathered to witness something they had never seen before. The human soldiers wept. They knelt beside their fallen comrades and cried openly. They held each other and shook with grief. Officers and enlisted alike, men and women who had fought like demons hours before, now broke down in tears without shame. And then, when the moment passed, they stood up. They wiped their faces. They collected their weapons. And they returned to duty, ready to fight again if needed. High Arbiter Zinkel watched in silence. Their crystalline form chiming with emotions too complex to name. They feel everything, they observed quietly. And they keep going anyway. It was the most terrifying thing they had ever witnessed. 3 months after the Vorath attack, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session in their rebuilt chamber. The repairs were not yet complete. Scorch marks still darkened some walls. Empty seats marked where delegates had died in the assault. But the Council endured, as it had endured for millennia. High Arbiter Zinkel called the session to order. Their crystalline form caught the light as they addressed the assembled representatives. "We gather today to discuss a matter of great importance. The provisional membership status of humanity must be reviewed in light of recent events." The ancient being paused. "Ambassador Vextal of the Corvani Collective will present the revised assessment." Vextal moved to the central platform. His skin displayed the color of honored respect, a shade that his species rarely used. Behind him, holographic displays came to life, showing footage from the battle for Station Nexus. 3 months ago, I stood in this very chamber and told you that humans were a fearful species, Vextal began. I showed you evidence of their war films and memorials. I pointed to their protests against military action and their treatment of traumatized soldiers. I concluded that they would pose no threat because they feared warfare too much to engage in it effectively. He paused, letting the images play. Human soldiers fighting in smoke-filled corridors. Human medics treating the wounded while under fire. human bodies laid out with care and respect after the battle ended. I was wrong. Not about the facts, but about what they meant. His voice carried across the chamber. Humans do fear war. They fear it more deeply than any species we have ever studied. They understand its costs, its trauma, its lasting wounds. They create art about its horrors because they feel those horrors with an intensity we can barely imagine. The display shifted to show the human soldiers who had fallen defending the station. Their names appeared beneath their faces, along with brief details about their lives. Private First Class Amy Chen, age 23. She was afraid. She fought anyway and died protecting delegates she had never met. Her last words, according to survivors, were telling her squad to keep moving forward. Vextel's mandibles clicked softly. Corporal Marcus Webb, age 27. He had written letters to his family talking about how scared he was. He charged a Vorth position alone to buy time for civilians to escape. The images continued. Face after face. Story after story. We watched these humans die for us, Vexel said. We watched them take wounds that should have stopped them and keep fighting. We watched them weep over their fallen comrades, then stand up and return to duty. And we finally understood what we had missed in all our observations. He turned to face the full council. Humans do not fight because they lack fear. They fight despite their fear. They feel everything. Every loss, every wound, every nightmare that follows. And they keep fighting because they believe some things are worth that price. The Thesari delegate flickered with bright intensity. This is why their support systems for warriors are so extensive. Not because their soldiers are weak, but because humans acknowledge the true cost of what they ask their fighters to endure. Exactly, Vextel agreed. Their memorial ceremonies honor the sacrifice. Their treatment of psychological wounds refuses to abandon those who have suffered. Their war poetry and films remind them of what warfare truly costs, so they never make the decision to fight lightly. He paused. These are not signs of a fearful species in the way we understood the term. They are signs of a species that takes warfare seriously, that counts every cost, and that fights anyway when they believe the cause is just. High Arbiter Zinkel addressed the chamber. The evidence supports a significant revision of our assessment. Humanity's fear of war does not make them weak. It makes them careful. And when they choose to fight despite that fear, they become something far more formidable than species who rush into battle without counting the cost. The Vorton delegate, the massive armored being who had questioned the original assessment, rose to speak. I was skeptical of humans from the beginning, but for the wrong reasons. I thought their fear made them unpredictable, dangerous in a cornered-in way.
Oh, yeah.
I now see that their fear is precisely what makes them reliable. They will not start wars carelessly, but when war comes to them, they will not stop until it is finished. In light of these findings, Zinkel announced, I propose that humanity be granted full council membership with all associated rights and responsibilities. This includes a permanent seat on the Security Council. The vote was unanimous. After the session ended, Vexel found Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Holloway in the observation deck. She was watching the stars, her arm still in a sling from wounds that were healing slowly. The doctors had told her she would recover fully, but there would be scars. Congratulations on your species' full membership, Vextel said, joining her at the window. Patricia nodded. Thank you, Ambassador. Though I imagine it came at a higher price than anyone expected. Yes. Vextel was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about something, Sergeant Martinez said to me. He spoke of duty, of choosing to face fear because something else matters more. His skin shifted through colors as he searched for words. My people have warrior traditions stretching back thousands of years. We have ceremonies and rituals and elaborate codes of honor. But I realize now that they are empty. Empty. Our warriors have never truly been tested. Our security forces abandon their posts at the first sign of real danger. All our traditions of courage were built on nothing but words. He turned to face her. Your species has no elaborate warrior culture. You do not celebrate combat or glorify violence. You treat war as a tragedy, not a glory. And yet, When the moment came, you were the ones who fought. Patricia considered this carefully before responding. Maybe that's because we've had so much practice. Humans have been fighting each other for as long as we've existed. Every generation has seen war. Every family has lost someone. She looked back at the stars. We've learned what it costs. We've buried enough of our young to know exactly what we're asking when we send soldiers into battle. And yet you keep doing it when we have to. Only when we have to. Patricia turned to meet Vextel's gaze. That's what you missed in your assessment, Ambassador. Our war movies aren't propaganda telling us how glorious combat is. They're warnings. They're reminders of what we lose every time we choose to fight. We make them because we never want to forget the price. But if you understand the price so well, how can you still pay it? Patricia smiled, though there was sadness in it. Because sometimes the alternative is worse. Sometimes not fighting means letting innocent people die. Sometimes it means watching evil win because good people were too scared to stand up. She paused. We've learned that being afraid isn't the worst thing. Living with the knowledge that you let something terrible happen because you were too scared to act, that's worse. They stood in silence for a while, watching the distant lights of the galaxy. What happens now? Vexel asked eventually. With your species as full members of the Council, I imagine we'll do what we always do. Try to avoid fights when we can. Negotiate, trade, build relationships. Patricia's voice hardened slightly. But if someone threatens our allies or attacks the innocent, we'll do what we did here. We'll be scared and we'll fight anyway. The Varath will return. Their defeat here was temporary. The Hive will rebuild and attack again, perhaps in greater numbers. Then we'll be ready. Patricia looked at him directly. And we won't be alone. That's the point of alliances, isn't it? Standing together against threats too big for any single species to face? Vextel's skin shifted to the warm color of genuine friendship. I believe humanity will teach us many things, Lieutenant Colonel. Perhaps most importantly, what true courage looks like. And maybe you'll teach us something too, Patricia replied. Like how to build a civilization that doesn't need to fight every few decades. That would be a worthy exchange. 30 years later, when the Vorath Hive launched its great war against the Galactic Council, humanity stood at the forefront of the defense. Human soldiers, pilots, and commanders served alongside warriors from dozens of species, teaching them the hard lessons that humanity had learned over thousands of years of conflict. The war was long and terrible. The costs were immense. But the Council held, united in a way it had never been before, and in the military academies, where young officers of all species learned the art of defense. They studied the Battle of Station Nexus. They learned about Sergeant First Class Danny Martinez, who lost an eye in one war and fought through another. They learned about Amy Chen and Marcus Webb and Jerome Palmer, and all the others who died that day protecting beings they had never met. Most importantly, they learned the truth that the Council had so badly misunderstood at first contact. Humans fear war. They fear it more than almost anything. They understand its costs better than any species in the known galaxy. That is precisely what makes them so dangerous. When they decide to fight one anyway, because a species that fights despite its fear, that counts every cost and pays it willingly, that mourns its dead and keeps going, that species does not stop until the job is done. The Vorath learned this lesson eventually. So did every other hostile power that threatened the Council in the centuries that followed. Humans fear war. Never make the mistake of thinking that means they cannot wage it.